Hey guys, those are bare frame rails on that flatbed. And each one has a specific serial number, so then you can pull up the specific build sheet for that specific serial number. And who the customer is. And the plant they are at is the one that builds all the custom trucks. And it could be for logging, dump truck, or frame truck. They have a custom one that's a tri-drive twin steer. And it's a chassis. And then they have an air blaster that gets all the dirt and grime off before it goes into the building. And then they have a sequence based on the production schedule. Frame rails then get flipped vertically once they enter the building, and then they get the cross members. And then the torsion plates. And then they will be ready to be tied down. And that frame you guys see right there is a twin steer tri-drive. And right there is where they do the rear axles. And that's where they install the brake pads and cylinders. And then they got a spot where if parts have to be welded on, they weld them on. And if parts can be assembled onto it, they assemble them in right where that one rear end is. And they install all the parts from the bottom because it makes it way easier compared to from the top. And some, like the axles, have different torque specs depending on what the build is. And that orange tool right there does all 4 U-bolts at once instead of each individual one. And then they are paint marked. And the machine knows when to stop for torque, but then he puts a torque seal on it to confirm that it's torque to spec. They start it upside down, but then it gets flipped the right side up, so the axles are facing the ground instead of facing the air. And then they have tie down, which involves airlines and no telling what else. I'll let you guys know. And they're cut to length and they're bolted to the chassis. And they are tied down to the chassis to make sure there's no rubbing. And which those lines are for air. They first get cut into the specific length and then put into place and zip tied. And then they are finally zip tied to the chassis. And then they install the drive lines from underneath, but then they're trying to get it to where they can do it from the top side until it gets to the drivetrain line. And then this chassis is ready to get painted. And then parts that are not getting painted get masked. Otherwise, all the parts that get painted are not masked. And then they get sent to chassis paint. If the plumbing is painted, it's painted in Portland. And then if it's not painted, if it's not painted, it was assembled at the Cleveland plant. The reason why they paint and sometimes don't paint is to identify which line is which. And then that chassis is waiting to get dropped into the main line, which is the main production line. And then there's a pin, and then when it gets time, they got a hole it drops into. And the chassis are all hand painted because they can't do automated because of all the different colors that a chassis could possibly be. And then those shelves have small parts that get carted from there to wherever they need to go for whatever build. And then parts get pre-assembled, and the plant work is 24 hours, but the employees do not work 24 hours. So some parts get dropped to the chassis that is not getting built because they're not there 24 hours. So it just depends. So if they don't get it done one day, they'll start it up the next day. And the paint booths are wide open to where they have big fans that circulate the air. That's the reason why both ends of the paint booths are open. And then you can see the front axle line. Then the front axles come from one side, then the rear axles come from the other side, and then they go onto the chassis. And then after the axles are installed, they start down the line. The big booth is for the frames, then the small booth is for all the other small stuff like fenders and a bunch of other small stuff. And then there are the cross members. And then you can see some cabs, and then they have a specific spot for the hoods. And they are brought in by sequence based on schedule. And then it goes through a paint inspection process. And so the cabs show up painted, so then they go through a whole inspection process. And then they have a hood inspection spot, and then after the hoods are inspected, if they're good enough, they get put into paint. And they go left if they need to go to a paint booth, but then if they go right if they don't need to go through a paint booth. And if the hoods are good, they go to assembly, and then afterwards they go to the chassis. And then there are the paint booths for the cabs if they need touch up. And if they do not need to go through the paint booth, they send them down the line. And the big booth right there that you can barely see is the chassis paint booth. And then they have an oven for the chassis. And by the time they leave the paint booth, they're dry.
Engine build-up process happens at the back.
And then the engine process build-up happens in the back. And then after the engines are built up, they're hooked up to the transmissions. And then they got a C shape that for the radiators and fuel lines. And then they set the whole engine and transmission as one into the chassis. And then the crane and the line move at the same pace so that they can set the engine and transmission into the chassis. And then after that all happens, it's in motion all the time when they put all the other parts on. So the engines, transmissions, chassis, and cabs are all in sequence. They got a mezzanine for the hood, and chrome and mirrors and lights. The chrome lights and hood have a specific spot to where they get installed at. And they got a specific lighting package for if it's good or if there's an issue. And that thing is a fuel tank bin, from what it sounded like, for the lighting. Fuel tank fin and a raspberry light to power it all. And before it was siren type lights. And when they had those, it was a sight light issue because they were originally on poles. And then right there is fuel tank installed. Then they have quality inspectors all through the line to make sure everything is installed to spec, including for fuel tanks and everything else. And then there's a cab assembly, and there's a specific way they go down, which is by going down and back, which involves interior and electrical. And firewall, and then they go up to get set on the chassis, and then all the dashes that go to spec for each individual vocational truck. And in regards to the dashes, it's gauges and switches that could be going in different spots in the dashes. And they got cabinets to test the dashes and everything. And from this point is like the last point when then they get all tied in together. And then that's the final line all the way out. And then that track and the other track are sequenced together. And then that's the truck, and then everything else has to get installed to it. And then that cab right there, the blue and green, is when it goes into the assembly from underneath the cab for the floor.
We'll come in line, and what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3. That W right over there is where that blue cab's gonna go.
Are you a small business owner trying to design a website? You should definitely.
Oh, that green stuff may be some protective wrap while they put the truck together. Thinking about it. And right there is where they fill all the fluids for the truck. And right there is seat and steering wheel install. And then the sun visors. And then that mezzanine has the hoods where all the lights and chrome get installed.
They're doing install of the hood assembly up top of it.
Yeah, exactly.
The hoods aren't just riding around up there. They get built.
No, yeah, they got
Okay.
built up too. Yeah. Yeah, and then they come down on up here. You'll see that one obviously is going to go on this truck here. So,
And then green one for the green track, or no, this one to this truck, that one to that truck, because this one's already got a hood.
that one's got the hood on. On the left end is going to be our windshield robot. Installing the windshield here, so use a robot here. Get a very consistent.
And then right there is where the windshields get installed. And that includes the seal for the windshield. And the back glass as well. And then what happens right there is the tire install. And then the multis nut runner that torques the wheels down. It's the multi-spindle nut runner that torques the wheels down.
That'll torque them down.
So that does like the U-bolt where it torques them all.
All at the same time.
All at the same time?
Yeah, 10 spindle.
Are you sure that does like the U-bolt where it torques them all?
All at the same time.
All at the same time?
Yeah, 10 spindle.
Are you sure?
Where it torques all 10 down at once. And this truck right here, they'll lift the rear up to where it gets the dollies out from up under the 3 rears. But then it'll still be on the front dolly. And then the front will ride on the dolly until it gets to the pit, and then the dolly will get removed from the front end.
They'll fire.
And then they'll fire the truck up, and then they'll just drive it out. And then after they're off the assembly line, it'll be an offline process.
Wheel alignment, that kind of stuff. Yeah, they'll do things like wheel alignment, that kind of stuff. Inspection, and then we've got specific bays for
Just
everything
first
here.
startup for that truck?
Yeah. So we'll fire them up to make sure they actually start up.
So we just got that very first start for that truck ever in history.
Yeah, it's the first time that's been started. So that's where we kind of find out, did we do everything right? Does it work?
Yeah. But so then this is your kind of...
On this side, it's still going to be electrical, so any software issues or electrical issues can be fixed up here. And then from there over, it's all either longer projects or any other mechanical installs if we didn't have a part in time for production, but it's a smaller part, like a tire, we can install it over here. So again, as you look here, every truck is unique, right? Like here is where it really starts to stand out. And all, again, high complexity, right? So we'll build this switch steer, and then we'll build a tri-drive and a tandem tractor, so it's...
Dadgum, I hope I don't get copyrighted for playing some of his video in my video. And back there is the wheel alignment, and then you will see there's a mechanical bays.
And then, yeah, mechanical bays over here, and then offline paint. So should there be any paint issues whatsoever, we'll be able to address those. So
If anything got nicked or bumped during any of this stuff,
any other, polypollen, any paint mismatch, stripe misalignment, anything like that, we'll fix here.
now there is a lot of custom stuff like this one here. The slider goes all the way back.
Those bumps are to test the axle dwell, and then they have a dyno for them. And then after the dyno, they go through a water leak test. And then when they put them on those bumps, they get it to where then it fills up the axles and everything with oil. And at this factory, they build the right-hand drive Australian trucks. So they're trying to find one. And the right-hand drive Western Stars are only built in Portland, and then they're shipped to Australia. Whoa, this is something unique Western Star has. It's like fully decked out, stacks, turn signals and everything.